Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this last day of our symposium, and welcome to the morning session. Now, before I will introduce to you our keynote speaker, we would like to provide some information on the red poppies. Many of you asked what this means, and you will get the explanation. Please.
Great. Thank you very much. I am Stephen Smith with the Radiation Protection Division of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. I'm not the keynote speaker for today, so I will be very, very brief. I wanted to speak to you on behalf of both the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission as well as part of my role as an active member of the Canadian Armed Forces, the Canadian military. And today, as was said, I want to talk to you a little bit about what the poppy means. So in Canada, the poppy is a symbol of remembrance, owing largely to the popularity of the poem In Flanders Fields, which was written during the First World War by Canadian soldier and poet Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. The opening line of the poem, which many Canadians have to learn in school, "In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row." The inspiration for this was the poppies that would grow in the battlefields through the disturbed soil. Today, the poppy is a symbol of remembrance that Canadians wear, and it is to remember the soldiers and personnel who have both served and sacrificed for Canada during any of the wars and up until today. The poppy is worn from the last Friday in October through to November 11th, Remembrance Day in Canada. In addition, the poppy is a symbol of the Royal Canadian Legion's Poppy Campaign. The Poppy Campaign aims to provide support to veterans and soldiers, as well as their families, who find themselves in times of trouble and need some assistance. So it is my honor, and thank you very much for allowing me this brief time to explain to you what the poppy is and what it means to Canada. Thank you very much, and I will turn it back over.
Thank you very much. All right, and now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker of the day, Mr. Fred Dermarkar. Fred is President and CEO of Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, AECL. Prior to this job, prior to joining AECL, Fred was President and CEO of the CANDU Owners Group, which is a non-for-profit organization to advance collaboration between CANDU nuclear reactor operators worldwide. Fred has been working in the Canadian nuclear industry for almost 40 years now. He has occupied a variety of positions at Ontario Power Generation in support of the design, commissioning, operation, and refurbishment of its CANDU reactors. Fred has received the Canadian Nuclear Association's Ian McRae Award in recognition of his substantive engineering contributions, his leadership, and his positive influence on the Canadian nuclear industry. And he received the Nuclear Excellence Award from the World Association of Nuclear Operators in recognition of his contributions to Ontario Power Generation's overall post-Fukushima response. Today, he will speak on radiation science and communications for future nuclear. Fred, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Werner. And bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Je suis ravi d'être ici avec vous ce matin. And I want to start off by, first of all, thanking Bruce Power and the organizers for hosting a wonderful dinner last night. The conversation was very engaging. The entertainment was fabulous. So please take a moment and join me in thanking them for that. You know, last night the White Thunder, the group that performed for us, it really brought home to me the tapestry of traditions and cultures that existed in this land before Europeans came 500 years ago or so. And it's wonderful to see that reflected today. And it leads me to the land acknowledgement that to recognize that we are situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And it's with deep gratitude that we do acknowledge basically their welcoming of us. So I had some prepared remarks coming in, but I decided to dispense with the prepared remarks and alter them. And the reason for that is that the discussions that have taken place over the last 3 days have been really enriching and engaging. The one thing that is clear to me is that the issues that the ICRP is confronting are well understood. The approaches to resolving them are a lot more complicated. And that complexity of issues, the dialogue that is taking place has been truly impressive. I want to say as well that I was particularly moved by the presentations by the delegates from Japan in regards to Fukushima. And it really highlighted for me that overprotectiveness may be damaging as well. And that's going to be a bit of a theme for me as I go through my discussion today. Also, Werner, I'm going to surprise you. I'm going to be talking about a different subject than the one that you introduced. Again, this is part of pivoting to what I'm hearing and hopefully communicating something that's of relevance. And what I'd like to do is talk about RP's contribution to enabling the energy transition. The energy transition being the greatest crisis that we're facing, and possibly one of the greatest crises that humanity has ever faced. And RP has a key role to play. I will say as well here that when I use the word RP, for me, it's about radiation professional, not radiation protection. And I distinguish that because the discussions that I've heard over the last 3 days have accentuated that protection is just a subset of the whole discourse around radiation. The discussion around ethics and values, the impacts on society, it really elevates radiation protection to something much greater. So for me, RP, radiation professionalism. Now, I'm not from the RP community. This is something that's new to me. I have been in the nuclear community for over 40 years now, and the work ICRP has done has been foundational to everything we do in the nuclear community. ICRP has had a profound impact on our industry, and it's poised to have a profound impact going forward. The actions of the people in this room coming out of this symposium will determine whether this impact is a positive one on our world in terms of enabling the energy transition or not. What you do today will be foundational to what we do going forward. Now, for my discussion this morning, I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of AECL, and then I'm going to narrow it down to an overview of the Chalk River Labs, our priorities, some examples of the work that we're doing that's relevant to radiation protection, and then I'm going to talk about the energy transition in Canada, the contribution of radiation professionals, and I'll summarize with some key messages. So what you see here is a very quick overview of Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. The map of Canada has a number of crosses on it. Those crosses represent the areas where AECL operations are taking place. Now, what's AECL? We are what we call a Crown Corporation. And for those who are outside of the Commonwealth, a Crown Corporation is basically a state-owned company. Our mandate really is three parts. We're here to enable nuclear science and technology through innovation. We're here to manage the government's responsibility for radioactive waste and commissioning. And finally, we own, AECL continues to own and license its CANDO IP, intellectual property, and our role is to ensure that we are deriving optimal value from the CANDO IP. And we do at least the first two things through something that we call a government-owned, contractor-operated model. AECL is the government owner. Our contractor-operator is Canadian Nuclear Labs. And they're the ones that execute the work around the labs and around managing the legacy waste. I will tell you, we get an appropriation from the Government of Canada that's just over $1 billion a year. Last year it was $1.25 billion. About 2/3 to 3/4 of that is spent on managing the legacy waste. So let me talk for a moment about the Chalk River Labs. A few things to point out, and many of the Canadians in the audience might know some of the things that I will be sharing with you, but you might learn a thing or two as well, because our history, our nuclear history, is indeed a very rich one. The very first sustained critical reaction that took place outside of the United States happened at the Chalk River Labs in 1946. So Canada was country number 2 to become a nuclear nation. And then what followed, the UK, France, Russia, China, and others followed after that, but Canada was number 2. The following year, in 1947, Canada started up the NRX reactor. It was Canada's largest science investment at that time, and it was the world's largest research reactor. 5 years later, the Government of Canada created AECL. So NRX was already operating, but the Government of Canada recognized the strategic importance of nuclear science and technology, and through an act of Parliament, AECL came into being. So what are we now? We are the Chalk River Labs themselves are 9,000 acres, the lab site, with a 200-acre lab complex, 17 nuclear facilities, 70 major buildings, including a research center and materials R&D center. Now, some of the big accomplishments in of Chalk River, we developed CANDO reactor technology. Today, there are 49 operating CANDO reactors or reactors that are of a very similar design to CANDO reactors. And through the CANDO reactor technology in Canada alone, CANDO reactors have enabled us to displace 2,400 megatons of CO2, and we displace today about 40 megatons of CO2 per year through our CANDO reactors. But it wasn't just about CANDO. We had a leadership role to play in material science, and 2 Nobel laureates in Canada came through the labs, Bertram Brockhouse and Art MacDonald. And the last thing was the labs, up until 2018, produced the lion's share of medical isotopes. There's a tremendous amount to be proud of from Chalk River Labs. Now, what are our priorities going forward? The site is 70 years old. It's getting old. I know what that feels like because I'm almost there. I have a few years to go to get to 70. I'm only at 62. And yeah, when you get to be 70, the site is getting old. So we are revitalizing the site, where the government has given us $1.2 billion to be spent over 10 years for site revitalization. And the picture that you see there is a stylization of our biggest investment in the site revitalization. It's the Advanced Nuclear Materials Research Center. And that will be the site where our new hot cells are going to be located, and it will also be producing fresh fuel, different kinds of fuel designs. The other thing that's a key priority for us is moving ahead with nuclear science and technology. And we have the areas that we're focused on are energy, health, safety, security, and the environment. We serve 14 federal government departments and agencies, including the CNSC that is very well represented here, including Health Canada, and we do work with Department of National Defense. We're also set up to support operators and industry. And through the Can-Do Owners Group, we do over $40 million worth of work for the industry. And finally, we're engaging with academia to ensure that maximum value is derived from the labs in terms of moving forward nuclear science across Canada. The third thing that we're looking at is enabling new nuclear demonstration and deployment. And we've invited proponents to site small modular reactors on our sites at Chalk River and Whiteshell. And actively right now, Global First Power, a consortium of Ontario Power Generation and Ultrasafe Nuclear Corporation, is seeking a license, is in the process of seeking a license to build an SMR at our Chalk River site. As I mentioned before, we also want to derive optimal value from our Can-Do IP, and we're working with our licensee, SNC-Lavalin Nuclear, as well as Canada's major nuclear operators, Bruce Power, OPG, and NB Power, to revisit the Can-Do design to make it more attractive as a solution for Canada and the world. I want to say the Can-Do design is a current design that meets all modern-day codes and standards and has undergone, less than 10 years ago, all 3 stages of the CNSC vendor design review. And finally, we have decommissioning and waste management as being a key area. And this is a whole discussion unto itself. The only thing I want to mention here is that we are experiencing issues very similar to those that were discussed in some of these activities. We're in the process of decontaminating land that was contaminated in the 1940s and 50s, where people are living today. And so we are disrupting their communities in order to decontaminate the land. A lot of discussion around, are trees more important than contamination? Because to clean up some contamination means removing some beautiful trees from the community. And again, it highlights the societal nature of radiation protection. And we're living with it right now. Now, I want to narrow down and talk a little bit about the biological research facility. I mentioned to you we have 17 facilities at the site. This is one of them. And I mentioned this one because it's really relevant to the community gathered here. I'll read off the slide in this case because it provides the key statistics. The Biological Research Facility, or BRF, investigates in vitro and in vivo animal models, and it has the capacity for 20,000 lab rodents. It has a number of certifications, including Good Animal Practice, Specific Pathogen Free, Biosafety Level 2, And the last one we're particularly proud of. We've gone a long ways towards achieving certification for GLP, or Good Lab Practice, and full recognition will come next year in 2023. And again, the different kind of exposures to radiation, alpha, beta, gamma, neutron, multiple different isotopes, including tritium, uranium, acute and chronic exposures, and external and internal exposures in dosimetry. So a very broad and deep capability. So what have we been up to at the BRF? Through our program with our federal partners such as Health Canada and the CNSC, we are building the science and providing the evidence to understand the effect of radiation and change the public's perception of radiation, that in fact radiation may not be harmful, and at certain low doses it could even potentially be beneficial. Now, research at the BRF is showing that low-dose radiation may stimulate the activation of repair mechanisms that have long-lasting impacts which help protect people against diseases. The development of stem cell-based therapy relies on the availability of an adequate supply of healthy donor-derived stem cells. But these stem cells suffer from premature aging and decreased functional and regenerative capacity when they're removed from the body. So our radiobiology team undertook a study to investigate the effects of low-dose radiation exposure on mesenchymal stem and progenitor cells and endothelial colony-forming cells. In the study, these cells were irradiated with varying levels of radiation and aged in culture in a controlled manner, allowing us to monitor cell proliferation and functional changes. The cells treated with low-dose radiation demonstrated improved proliferation, mobility, and chondrogenic differentiation capacity. In other words, our research suggests that low-dose radiation prevents stem cells from aging. And by the way, we are in the process of patenting this technology for extending the life of stem cells. Now, another important area of research at the BRF involves tritium and its long-term impacts on humans. And as many of you may be aware, tritium is a byproduct of the operation of nuclear reactors, especially heavy water reactors, such as the CANDU reactors that produce about 15% of Canada's electricity. Much of the tritium produced by these reactors is extracted, repurposed, and commercialized by Ontario Power Generation. Tritium is extremely valuable. By estimates that I've seen, it's probably worth around 500 times the price of gold on a per gram basis. And it's used in several niche applications such as beta lights and beta voltaics. It's also an essential ingredient in fusion technology. But like many other elements and compounds, if it's ingested, inhaled, or absorbed into the skin at certain levels, it can cause an increased risk to health. And there have long been questions, and I would dare say disagreements, about where to draw the line for how much tritium is too much tritium. A difficult question, since trace amounts of tritium escape into the environments near power reactors. So AECL, along with the CANDU Owners Group, the CNSC, and Health Canada, have been carrying out several long-term animal studies in the BRF. And the goal is to identify gaps in knowledge regarding the LNT, or linear no threshold hypothesis, as well as to improve estimates of the relative biological effectiveness of different types of radiation. Our research is challenging the LNT that any level of exposure, no matter how small, is detrimental. Our 8-year study, conducted with more than 3,000 mice, challenged this by looking at the relative impact of tritium on the lifetime and tumor incidence in mice, and the relative biological effectiveness of HTO and organically bound tritium, compared to gamma radiation. This demonstrated no detrimental impact on survivability below 100 milligrays of exposure. These results suggest the existence of a threshold dose below which no detrimental effects are observed, which directly challenges the hypothesis that any level of exposure, no matter how small, is detrimental. Now, this is key for public communication. Public responds to simple messages. And the message the public hears today through the LNT model is that radiation kills no matter how small. Let me give you a couple of first-hand examples. We deal with indigenous communities quite a bit in the work that we do. The word for uranium, it never existed in the indigenous language historically because it didn't need to. The local indigenous communities that we deal with, their word for tritium is the rock that kills. Another example, when I meet with a chief near our White Shell facility, Chief Hendrickson, when I met with him, his comment to me was, as long as there's one atom of radioactive material on that site, my people will not want to hunt and fish on that site. He knows that it's not right, but he is not able to convince the community of this. And why is that? Because the messaging around radiation is that no matter how small, it kills. Now, ICRP is actually contributing to this messaging. We took this snapshot from the ICRP website yesterday. And I want to highlight two key words. When the ICRP talks about radiation, it immediately zeroes in on harmful effects and the need for protection. Is this appropriate? I think the ICRP is actually seeking the truth around radiation, seeking information to better understand the effects of radiation. But concluding that the effects are harmful a priori sends a very powerful message, and not a message that is conducive to people accepting nuclear and radiation. Now let me turn for a moment to the energy transition. And I want to show you, this is a study that AECL commissioned earlier this year. And this study shows the increase in electrical generating capacity that will be needed between now and 2050. The dark blue represents the increase in wind capacity. The light blue represents the increase in solar capacity. The in-between color blue is hydro, and it doesn't change very much because hydro is pretty much tapped out in Canada. The green represents the increase in nuclear. What we forecast by 2050 is the share of nuclear will need to go up to between 60 and 100 gigawatts. Our share today is 13 gigawatts. We're talking about at least a 5-fold increase in nuclear. Now, in order to increase nuclear capacity, you've got to build these nuclear plants somewhere. Today, there are 4 sites where we have nuclear plants. The Bruce site, the Darlington site, the Pickering site, and the LaPro site. 4 sites producing 13 gigawatts. If you just scale it, we'll need at least 20 sites. My guess, we'll need more than that, because the sites that we have today, if you take Bruce, for example, it's one of the world's biggest sites. And the sites that we go with going forward may not be as big. So just picture 20 sites going through environmental assessment, consulting with the public, when the public is carrying a belief that radiation, no matter how small, kills. Do you think we will be successful? Are we setting ourselves up for success with this kind of messaging? I think the answer is a very clear no. There are challenges, it's not just about the messaging around radiation. I have listed the 6 biggest challenges for new nuclear, whether it's large or small. By the way, my message around large reactors or small reactors, large or small, we need them all because the demand is so high. We need every option on the table if we're going to beat climate change. So 2 of the biggest issues that face us, and I don't have time to go through them all, are public acceptance and involvement, and licensing and site selection. And the licensing process, it makes direct use of the L&T model to assess the environmental impact. And of course, public acceptance I've talked about at some length. So I want to close out by, in a similar way to the way Bob McDonald closed out. He closed out with a picture of our world. I'm closing out with a picture outside our hotel rooms. That's what it looks like. It's a garden paradise. Our Earth is a garden paradise. But the trajectory we're on, it's not going to stay a garden paradise if we don't do something. So what is our legacy for future generations going to be? Are we going to leave them with something that looks like this, or something much more devastating? So I know that nobody wants, I know what the answer is for everybody in the room. We want to leave them with something that looks the way it looks right now. So to do that, I'd like to leave you with a few key takeaways. I want to say first, the ICRP is a very highly respected, international, learned organization. What you say has a profound influence on the international community. If we keep with the messaging that we've been on, we're not going to be able to influence the continued deployment of nuclear technology. We're going to be ruling out one of the key technologies that might make the difference between survival of the world and not survival of the world as we know it. So we can't continue to be doing what we've done all along. We need to start with the end in mind. We need to understand, what does it take to get licensing, and what does it take to get public acceptance from a radiation perspective, a knowledge of radiation perspective. And then we need to work backwards and ask, what can the ICRP do to resolve some of those issues that are potential showstoppers to nuclear deployment? So the issues are complicated. Somebody sitting right here at this seat said that several times. The issues are complicated. They are. They are. It's not easy. A fresh perspective is needed. We need to be transparent about uncertainty. Rumina mentioned that in her keynote yesterday. We also need to accept that there is always going to be some uncertainty. We need to quantify it, and we need to define what is acceptable. And the current L&T model, in my view, leaves no room for uncertainty. It's extremely certain on one side, and it's not a balanced uncertainty. We need to have the courage to be bold. And this isn't just from radiation professionals. All of us who want to advance on technologies to deal with climate change, we need to be bold. We need to have that courage to stand up and talk about what we believe in, not what people want to hear. And we have to have the wisdom and the humility to compromise, because it's compromise that will get us to where we need to be. If you stand firm on your own opinion and are not willing to listen to others, we won't move ahead. So we have to act now. The second message is very much one of we need to be able to communicate to the public the effects of radiation. And my key message there is it has to be simple and it has to be unequivocal. If we equivocate around the hazards around radiation, we're going to lose the public. If we have one country saying, this is the model, and another country saying, I don't agree, the model is something else, we're going to lose the battle. The public won't trust any of us. And I don't blame them. So we, you, the radiation professional leaders of the world, you're from around the world, we're counting on you to influence so that we have a consistent approach, unequivocal and simple. And finally, we've got a lot of capability in the labs. AECL and CNL are here to help in any way we can. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, which was a bit controversial, I would say. And I'm not so sure whether I would agree with everything you said. And I just would like to remind you that the dose is an important parameter, so the dose makes the effect, just as a reminder. And the second reminder is that LNT, at least how I perceive it, is not really a model, but it's an instrument we have developed for radiation RP, now radiation protection. And with this, my conclusion and take-home message is, yes, communication is really the key. How we transport the complicated issues in simple terms without losing too much of the scientific truth behind. That's my take-home message, actually. But now I'm just moderating this session, so I would like to, I would like you to comment, and I see already quite some. I don't know who was the first. Okay, so.
François Boschu from Committee 2. Thank you for this very interesting and stimulating talk. I would like to know how you reconcile your two recommendations. The first one being to talk more about uncertainty, and the other one to be unequivocal and speak in one voice and in a very simple manner. Because for me, it seems to be antagonistic.
I don't view them as being entirely antagonistic, but I understand the point really well. So I don't want to pretend that I am an expert on radiation science. But what I will tell you is the one thing I don't see as much of in things like the linear no threshold is I don't see the uncertainties described. What I hear, and maybe I'm mistaken, but what I hear is that we know there's an effect. We don't know exactly where the effect ends, but we know there's an effect, so we will extrapolate to zero. Now, that to me is not defining the uncertainty.
Okay.
But if my understanding is mistaken, I'm very open to being corrected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could answer to this, but I'm maybe not here right now.
Okay, okay.
Well, but I could answer, and I will do it.
Sure.
So, I mean, uncertainties is on our table, and we will probably in the near future have a task group dealing explicitly with uncertainties. And then those kind of questions must be discussed, and we must find a solution. And maybe you can contribute. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Who is next? Please, can you? I have no idea. So maybe go.
I think
yes.
so. My name's Phil Ujidi. I'm with the Environmental Protection Agency in the States, and we're kind of the keepers of the flame for LNT. So your statement that any amount of radiation, no matter what, is a detriment is incorrect. What it says is that any amount of additional radiation increases the probability of an effect. They're two different totally things. And that really small doses are really small risks. That's different than saying any amount of radioactivity is a detriment and is going to hurt you. Okay, that number one. Number two.
Can I address number one? And again, as not an expert, but my understanding of the LNT, the way it works, at least the way it's been used, is that you take a dose and multiply it by a population, and then you get a number of potential fatalities. Is that correct?
That's a misapplication, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the worst thing you could do with it. But because that's how population dose gets
Fair enough,
misused.
but
Okay?
it is being done.
Well, let's not encourage it to go further with your statements, okay? And the other thing about the strictness of these regulations are there for a purpose. Now, in the last 40 years or so, things got a whole lot better. But in my lifetime, I'm a few years older than you, in my lifetime, where I live in Southwest, because of inadequate regulation, we lost 1,500 uranium miners because they wouldn't vent the mines. Where I live in Grand Junction, Colorado, we had misuse of uranium mill tailings. People died. We had to clean up 4,000 properties. Okay, you had Thorotrast. The regulations end up catching up after things happen, the early radiographers. So we have these strict regulations for a reason, and they're effective and they work. So you have to, just like you acknowledge indigenous peoples and what happened to them, we can't move forward unless we acknowledge what happened in the past. Thank you.
I agree with that completely, and we can't lose sight of it. And I want to be clear, though. I don't want to suggest that we throw the baby out with the bathwater on this. I don't want to go to a wild west of no controls. That is not what I'm advocating. What I am advocating is that we take a hard look and make sure we're not being overprotective. Because the consequence, let me tell you, let me give you an example of what we experienced in Ontario, in southern Ontario. Before 2005, when we were operating coal plants, we had 50 to 60 smog days a year. A smog day meant that if you had a health issue, like a lung or asthma, any kind of breathing issue, you were not to go outside. Those smog days actually increased the incidence of health-related problems, and they limited the quality of life because the rest of us also were not encouraged to go out on smog days. Once we shut down the coal plants and we were on 60% nuclear, the air was clear. The real consequence of operating with coal was it was taking lives, it was contributing to poor quality of life or lesser quality of life, and I don't know how you take those factors into account when making decisions around how much protection we need to provide that potentially hurts the progress of nuclear energy. But I agree with you that we need to be mindful of the past, and we cannot go back to a wild west of no regulation. That is not where I'm going at all.
We have a lot of more. Maybe now on this side.
On
and
that side, yeah.
Next one, you maybe?
Yes.
Okay, please.
My name is Mahesh. I'm a committee member for 3, and I'm in the medical physics area. We do have an issue with the LNT, especially with discussing with the patient. That's fine. But my question is, you tell like we had, how do you pivot? You know, the ICRP is held very high respect around the world. From all these years we have been making the statement, you are telling us to change. How do you change without damaging the reputation of ICRP?
Exactly. Well, you know, I don't have an easy answer to that, but one of the questions yesterday by Mary Duarte of OPG was, do we have an opportunity, given the climate crisis, given the whole rethinking about the potential role for nuclear, do we have an opportunity to do a reset and use that as a basis for repositioning what we do? That may be one approach. The question you ask is a very complicated question. You cannot make change without incurring a consequence. Every change you make has a detrimental consequence and a positive consequence. So it needs to be managed very, very carefully. But I do believe that we have an opportunity for a reset around our messaging. The whole messaging around nuclear energy, nuclear science, and the effects of radiation on us. Somebody yesterday mentioned we have decades of experience today. We have in radiation science, we have what's the word I'm looking for? The justification for saying we're smarter today than we were, and we are evolving.
Yeah. Thank you. Now the gentleman on the other side, please.
My name's Carmen Tiano from the Ontario Building Trades, and I'm the Director of Occupational Services. I want to thank you for bringing this issue up, because it's been the elephant in the room for me on the LNT and where we move. My concern is very simple. In 2015, there was a petition at a regulator in the United States to move away from the LNT to a hormesis factor. That would be very problematic for the community, and saying a little bit of radiation is good for you just in case you get hit with a ton of radiation. I get where you're saying, but here's, I think, where the problem's gonna be. I like what Dr. Velshi said yesterday. Take a graduated approach, let's look at the LNT, but let's not move to a wild, wild west, because you will lose the community more. And what I mean is, how can you go in Southern Ontario and say, hey, we're gonna go to a model now where it says, let's give you radiation, so just in case, that will kill the messaging. So maybe your messaging should be, let's take a graduated approach, that if you're a worker in radiation, here's what's gonna happen. And maybe there'll be better messaging on how we deal with the community. I'm doing some work on per injury rates per kilowatt hour based on conventional work and nuclear. Nuclear is safer, we know that. Conventional is like 26 injuries or incidents per kilowatt hour. That's what maybe we need to be getting out there. And right now, I'm not a fan of getting rid of LNT for another model which will cause us bigger problems, because it may be an unintended consequence.
You bring up great points, and coming up with the right messaging is critical. If it was easy to come up with the right messaging, it would already be there. So it does need to be thought through, but I would say, lead with the science. More than anything, lead with the science and take a balanced approach. I heard discussions around an all hazards approach, a holistic risk methodology. I think we need to start putting things on a level playing field so that we're not being overly protective in one area at the consequence of another area.
Yeah, and I think what you said is perfectly fine. But most of the people are in the room. They're on the side of a graduated approach. Okay, so I think if that's the messaging, but don't blow out what's been said by ICRP since the 1950s.
So thank you. We have two further statements. I don't want to stop the discussion now, because this is really important. So give us, please, a few further minutes from the next session, so we have two further comments, please.
Thank you. I'm Stéphane Jean-François. I've been working for 30 years in rad safety, and I'm kind of representing I'm the middleman between Joe and Jane public and the regulators and the specialists talking about LNTs and hormesis and all that stuff that real people don't understand. So basically, my question is extremely simple. What would be the bias from a person like you working for AECL with regards to basically building nuclear power plants? My sub-question would be basically, what would you say to a person outside saying you need more nuclear power, perhaps they don't fear the nuclear power. They basically ask you why. We are heating right now a big, gigantic swimming pool right now with 2 or 3 swimmers a day. So this is the need for more nuclear power. So that, what would be our bias? And I would include the question to all of us. As RAD safety professional, what is our bias with regards to this?
So I mean, this is a huge question. Number one, conservation, which is what you're advocating, absolutely. And that's number one on everybody's list. Can you conserve? And by the way, I made the same observation around the swimming pool and seeing all the steam come off.
That's the justification type of thing, right?
I think it's unconscionable that we have such huge pools, open air. But notwithstanding that, that's not a big part of our electricity demand. The big part of our electricity demand is going to come in the form of converting all the gas-burning vehicles and industries into electricity-burning industries. And that's huge. That graph that I showed you, that takes conservation into account. But still, we're going to go 2 to 3 times by 2050, the electrical consumption. And the reality is we're out of hydro. We're predicting a huge increase in wind, a huge increase in solar, but it's not enough. So what do you do with the shortfall?
Thank you.
Some people are saying build batteries. Can you imagine a battery that will last 4, 5, 6 days when the wind's not blowing? I don't think so. The technologies will have to change considerably. We can make hydrogen. Do you know that you lose 60 to 70% of the energy when you make hydrogen and then reburn it? So if we were to do that, these predictions for electricity demand would go even higher. So you need to have a practical approach. And our study did balance out wind versus solar versus nuclear, and we see a much bigger growth in wind and solar than we do in nuclear, but we still need baseload energy.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you. Thank you. Last question.
Andrzej Wojcik, Stockholm University, main commission member. I'm a radiation biologist, and I have 2 comments. One is about what you said, that the results from Chalk River challenge the LNT. Well, they do not, because there are results like this all over the place, and we have results going in the other direction. And actually, if you look at UNSCR reports, and UNSCR is currently chaired actually by Canada, then the UNSCR summarizes all available data, and the recent report says, well, no, there are no data that challenge LNT, because they go all over the place. That's the first comment. The second comment is the LNT discussion. Yes, you may say, well, any dose kills. What you tend to forget, and maybe you should use this or remember this when you communicate next time, is radiation is a weak carcinogen. So LNT, yes, but nevertheless, the level of risk is very low. So my advice, if I may express it, when you talk to the chief at Chalk River next time, is say, well, if you don't hunt and you go and eat lunch at the local McDonald's, you're doing yourself much more harm than when you eat the fish that contains some becquerels.
I mean, I'm convinced by that argument, but I can tell you it's a very difficult argument. And we've just gone through hearings at Chalk River for a near-surface disposal facility. 5 days of hearings to build a disposal facility for low-level waste. The number of interveners who expressed grave concern about a tiny amount of radiation getting into the Ottawa River was overwhelming. So the public feels differently. So there's something that we need to do differently in our messaging. And we need to use the science to support that messaging. And I'm just saying, let's understand the uncertainty. Let's quantify it. Let's be transparent about it.
Yes.
And then let's communicate a message that is simple and not a complex message. and that is firm. I
mean,
don't know what else to say.
I mean, this final word I would really sign.
Okay.
So and we should build on science, yes. And we build on unscare in this case. This is also an issue. Uncertainties are important, and we must be very careful which kind of messages we provide to the public, and make sure that they do not misunderstand what we are saying. And this is my take-home message. We must be very clear that some sentences I heard even today now, it's not what ICRP says. It's actually not what we want that people do, but obviously we are not good enough to explain that. So exactly. Communication is an issue. And again, this is something which is on our agenda. So thank you very much for this very vivid discussion.
Thank you.